Welcome back. Well, really digging into the supply chain right now. A lot of concerns about inputs. I mean, we've been talking about it with fertilizer prices. I mean, Senki, when you look at heading into next year, is there a chance that farmers may not be able to source the inputs that they need, like nitrogen fertilizer?
At this moment, it is highly likely because the fertilizer price has actually increased about more than 100% compared to last year. So it's really high rocking prices, and even the lack of supply is making unavailable for farmers. So farmers may need to think about what would be the maximum return to the fertilizer application rate. So by adjusting the application rate, they can get the maximum outcome. And or the other way would be just planting more soybeans, which doesn't require as much fertilizer as corn, so that would be another option.
Yeah, but at the same time, you're looking at things like glyphosate prices up 100%, 200%, 300%. So, I mean, there's no right answer here, right? But as you look at it, Ian, really what is at play? Is it just transportation? Is it just labor? You know, what is the biggest factor right now really putting a crimp into the supply chain?
Well, because I focus on the international supply chains as opposed to the domestic supply chains. So what as a trade economist, what's really interesting to observe this year is that during the pandemic, global agricultural trade was very resilient. We didn't see much of a decline and it rebounded very quickly. But what's affecting trade right now in terms of costs is the cost of transportation, particularly marine transportation. In fact, if you look at transport costs out of both the Gulf and the Pacific Northwest, they've both doubled in the last year. And that's driven by what's called bunker fuel, which is the diesel fuel for the large bulk carriers. There's a shortage of bulk marine shipping capacity, and that's got nothing to do with the pandemic. It's got nothing to do with the global supply chain problem. We've had excess capacity in merchant shipping for a number of years, and that excess capacity has been run down. But right at a time when we have this growth in demand and the other things going on in supply chains, that's really started pushing up transportation costs. Plus you have port slowdowns because of COVID-19. So if in the broader supply chain trade discussion, the story is mostly about containers. Where are containers? Empty containers going back to China. I didn't know this until I looked at the data, and I have to thank Ben Brown for telling me about this, but only 10% of exported commodities in agriculture go by containers. It's 90% goes through, bulk carriers. So that's what's really driving the transportation costs and slowdowns in getting in and out of ports.
Well, yeah, and so, I'm talking to a producer in California. He said, he grows grapes and he won't even risk exports right now because it takes so long that the goods are actually, not even good anymore once it reaches places like Asia. So when you look at consumer prices overall, report came out up 6.2% this year. That is the most since 1990. Food prices, are those at the same level when you look at the consumer price index that recently came out of USDA?
Yeah, a little bit lower than that is where we are at on average with the consumer price index. From what I've seen, certainly for beef and pork, it's a little bit higher. That's where we're seeing the highest prices. What we're really seeing with prices, I think, is just kind of a natural rebound through the pandemic. So I think there's a lot of concern by consumers that they're seeing prices rise pretty rapidly, but a lot of that I think just has to do with that rebounding demand.
But Ian, real quick, when you look at things like wheat prices, I mean, when you look at the consumer prices that we're seeing, can you tie that directly to some of the commodity prices that are at a higher level?
I watch international food prices, which really matters to global food security, and we've seen a huge increase in the last year in vegetable oils and oilseed prices and wheat. There are three major subsistence commodities: wheat, corn, and soybeans. Obviously, corn and soybeans are mostly fed to animals, so wheat is what gets consumed directly by low-income consumers in developing countries. And that's been driven mostly by weather conditions. Canada obviously had a drought. There were poor weather conditions earlier in the year in Russia. Russia's actually been taxing its exports of wheat to keep down its own domestic prices, but that's been pushing up global prices. And there's been a lot of pressure on the demand side, particularly in the Middle East. Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, and other countries there have had poor wheat crops and they've been sucking in wheat imports at a time when we have relatively low stocks of wheat. So that's what I'm watching right now. And of course, fuel prices, transportation costs. So it's classic supply-demand shocks.
Yeah. Well, Sinki, I mean, when you look at net farm income picture, you know, considering this year and next year, it looks like it could be a lot different just because of the rising input prices. Is there reason to believe that commodity prices could continue to find fuel with the dynamics that are at play right now?
Well, yeah, it's at this moment hard to predict, but like so far, like based on the USDA like latest projection, they said like corn price would be about $5.5 per bushel, which is about 20% higher than what we are here. And soybean price is also projected about $12.1 per bushel. That is also about, I think, 12% higher than 2020. So considering this like kind of positive projection, farm income would be at least positive, but you know, the net farm income, I mean net profit, can be a bit challenging by this like high rocking input prices.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Ian, Sinki, Zoe, thank you so much for joining us. We need to take a quick break and then we will have much more from right here at Ohio State University.